For the longest time, the whole game in global business was simple, right? You just made things wherever it was cheapest. But that world is, well, it's gone. What we're diving into today is this huge shift, a great recalculation, where politics is now drawing the new map of how the world does business. And this quote just hits it perfectly. For ages, geopolitics was like background noise on the news, something for diplomats to worry about, not CEOs. Not anymore. Now it's front and center. It's the detonator that can literally blow a business up overnight. Whoa, hang on a second. A detonator? That's intense. So what you're saying is that the entire world of business is now a minefield? That every single decision, down to the smallest component, is a step that could have explosive consequences? A minefield is a pretty good way to think about it, actually. It means the job of managing something like a supply chain has been totally transformed. What used to be a logistics puzzle, getting part A to factory B, is now a game of high-stakes geopolitical chess. The office has basically turned into a war room. And you can really see it right here. Think about a supply chain manager's desk 10, 15 years ago. It was covered with price quotes, shipping schedules, inventory logs. Now, those same papers are sitting right next to international sanction lists and detailed maps of political alliances. That is just wild. So the person who used to just order parts now needs to basically be a foreign policy analyst. That's not just a new task, that's a completely different job. It is a completely different job. And the engine driving all of this, the core conflict, is this massive tech competition between the United States and China. And we're not just talking about a simple trade war here. This is a fundamental fight over who gets to write the rules for the future of technology. So on the US side, the strategy is being called small yard, high fence. It's like they've identified this small, crucial yard of technologies, things like the most advanced AI and computer chips, and they've built a really high fence around it, with things like export controls.
Okay, small yard, high fence. That's a catchy phrase, but what does it actually mean for a company on the ground? And China isn't just going to sit back and take that, so what's their play?
It means companies are being forced to make a choice, a really tough one. Do you want access to America's cutting-edge technology, or do you want to sell to China's massive market? You probably can't have both. In response, China's rolling out its dual circulation strategy. Basically, they're trying to build up their own domestic market to be the main engine of growth, while also racing to become totally self-sufficient in all that key tech so they don't need the West. Wait, so if you're a big global company, this means you can't just have one global product anymore. They're basically telling you to build two completely separate, independent supply chains, one for the West and one for China. I mean, how is that even possible? It sounds incredibly expensive and complicated. It's a huge, huge challenge. And that's the thing, this fight isn't staying contained to just high tech. It's spilling over into new battlefields, where things we took for granted, like basic resources, are now being used as weapons. I mean, look at what the war in Ukraine did. It was a massive wake-up call, especially for Europe. Germany had this incredibly powerful industrial economy built on the foundation of cheap Russian natural gas. When Russia turned off the tap, entire industries were suddenly at risk of shutting down. The lesson here was brutal. Your supply chain is only as secure as the country it comes from. And this right here shows you the next potential crisis point. We're looking at rare earth minerals. These are vital for all the green tech we're building, from EV batteries to wind turbines. And this chart shows that China processes about 80% of the world's supply.
80%? You've got to be kidding me. So let me get this straight. If you want to build an electric car or a giant wind farm, the supposed future of our energy, you are almost completely dependent on a single geopolitical competitor? That seems like a massive vulnerability.
It's a huge vulnerability. And because of that, we're now seeing this mad scramble from both governments and companies to build new defenses. They're literally redrawing their global maps, searching for supply chains that are safer and more reliable.
One of the big ideas out there is friendshoring. It's pretty much what it sounds like, moving your factories and sourcing to countries that are political allies, countries that share your values. So you see American companies looking much more closely at places like Vietnam, India, or over in Europe, Poland.
Friendshoring, it's a nice term for it. But isn't it really just saying we're only going to trade with our friends now? I get the security part, but that has to be way more expensive, right? I thought the whole point of globalization was to find the cheapest place to make things.
Oh, for sure. It's often more expensive. But the thinking has changed. That extra cost is now seen as an insurance premium. You're paying a bit more to insure yourself against a catastrophic political event that could shut you down completely. Exactly. That's the trade-off. And it leads right into another related idea called nearshoring. This one is less about political alliances and more about pure geography. The goal is to bring your production physically closer to home, shortening those long, vulnerable supply lines.
A perfect example of this is what's happening between the US and Mexico. You're seeing this powerful new manufacturing corridor emerge. For a company in the US, having your factory a truck drive away in Mexico, instead of a container ship away on the other side of the world, well, that's a massive security upgrade. And while all this is happening, the world is also breaking up into these big regional economic blocs. You've got the RCEP, which is largely a China-centric group focused on lowering tariffs in Asia. Then there's the CPTPP, which is more about high standards for things like labor and the environment. For a global company, this is a nightmare. It's like having to learn the rules for 3 different sports at the same time. Okay, this is a lot. It sounds incredibly complex and honestly pretty terrifying if you're trying to run a business. So what's the answer? How do you even begin to navigate this new reality?
Right. And the source we're looking at argues you can't just sit back and react anymore. You have to get ahead of it. And the way you do that is by building what it calls a geopolitical radar system.
And this radar system has 3 main parts. First, you have to find a way to quantify political risk, to turn all this uncertainty into an actual number. Second, you have to build a rock-solid contingency plan. And third, for the really big players, you might need to operate with multiple separate corporate identities around the world. Okay, stop. Let's go back to that first one. Quantify political risk? How on earth do you do that? You can't put the odds of a war or a sudden trade embargo into a spreadsheet. That sounds completely made up. It's not about being a fortune teller. It's about forcing yourself to think differently. So let's say a company is looking to build a new factory. They'd analyze the country's stability, its history, its neighbors. And maybe they conclude there's a 30% chance that some political event over the next decade could make that factory worthless. Suddenly, the low cost of labor there doesn't look so appealing. It forces you to weigh the risks and rewards in a much more realistic way. And that leads to the second piece, contingency planning. This is all about having your plan B figured out before the crisis hits. It might mean you identify a second factory in another country and have it ready to flip a switch and start production if your primary site goes down. So you're saying every company now needs 2 of everything. 2 factories, 2 sets of suppliers. That sounds like the opposite of efficiency. It sounds incredibly wasteful. It might seem that way, but we're shifting from a world of just-in-time to a world of just-in-case. Yes, it costs more upfront, but the cost of having your only factory get shut down by a political crisis could kill your company. Suddenly, the cost of that backup plan seems pretty reasonable. Then you have the third, most complex strategy, and this is for the giant multinational companies. They're starting to operate with multiple identities. They create totally separate legal and financial entities. Their China operation is built in China for China, and their US operation in America for America. It's like building firewalls inside your own company so that a political fire in one part of the world doesn't burn the whole thing down. So really, when you boil it all down, it's this. For the last 30 or 40 years, the 2 words that drove global business were efficiency and cost.
Right. And now, those words have been replaced by security and resilience. It's not a small tweak. It feels like the fundamental rules of the game have been completely rewritten, for good.
Exactly. And this final thought really brings it home. That golden era of globalization and free trade, that's probably over. For the next decade, the single most valuable and most expensive asset a company is going to have is security. Security for its resources, its people, and its supply chains. Which really brings us to the final question, the one everyone needs to be thinking about. In this new world, when you really look at your own business, or even just the products you depend on every single day, is the supply chain behind it a fortress built to withstand these shocks? Or is it just a house of cards waiting for the next political wind to blow it all over?